The room is cold. The smell of candle wax and damp stone fills the air. A wooden box sits on a table in the center of the room. Around it, 3 men in dark coats lean in. Scholars, physicians, men of science. They have been waiting for this. One of them reaches for the lid. Inside is a woman, 22 years old, hanged by the neck less than an hour ago in front of a crowd of hundreds. Pronounced dead by the authorities, handed over to the University of Oxford for what comes next. Dissection. A legal, academic procedure. Routine, even. He opens the box, and she moves. Not a twitch, not a reflex. She moves. A breath escapes her lips, thin, broken, but real. Her fingers curl. Her chest rises. The men stumble back. The corpse is breathing. Her name is Anne Greene, and what happens in the next few hours will shake the foundations of English medicine, law, and the very definition of death itself. But to understand how a woman survived her own execution, you need to understand why she was there in the first place.
The year is 1650. England is raw and unstable. The Civil War has just ended. King Charles I was beheaded the year before. The country is under the control of Oliver Cromwell and the Puritan Commonwealth, a regime obsessed with moral order, discipline, and punishment. In this world, a servant girl has very little power. Anne Greene was born around 1628 in Steeple Barton, Oxfordshire. She came from a poor family, and, like most young women of her class and time, she entered domestic service as a teenager. By her early 20s, she was working in the household of Sir Thomas Reed, a wealthy, respected landowner. It was a job. It was a roof over her head. It was also, as it turned out, a death sentence. At some point during her employment, Anne became pregnant. The father was Geoffrey Reed, Sir Thomas's own grandson, a young man of means who would suffer no consequences whatsoever for what happened. Anne, terrified and alone, concealed the pregnancy. When she gave birth prematurely, the infant was stillborn. She hid the body. It didn't stay hidden. When the baby was discovered, Anne was arrested immediately. Under English law at the time, specifically the Concealment of Birth Act of 1624, concealing the death of an illegitimate child was presumed to be murder. It didn't matter if the child was born dead. It didn't matter that Anne had no history of violence. It didn't matter that the man responsible faced no charges at all. She was tried, convicted, and sentenced to hang. December 14th, 1650, Oxford Castle Yard. The gallows drew crowds. Public executions were a spectacle, theater for the masses, a warning carved in flesh and rope for anyone watching. Anne Greene was led out before hundreds of people. She gave a brief speech, as was tradition. She maintained her innocence to the end. She said the child had been born dead. Nobody in power cared. The rope was placed around her neck. She dropped. For nearly 30 minutes, Anne Greene hung from that rope. Those in attendance, friends, sympathizers, did what people sometimes did out of mercy. They pulled on her legs, beat on her chest, trying to speed up the inevitable and shorten the suffering. Standard practice. Brutal, but practiced. After half an hour, she was cut down. A soldier, just to be certain, struck her chest with the butt of his musket, hard. She did not respond. The officials pronounced Anne Greene dead. Her body was placed in a wooden coffin and transported across Oxford to the rooms of Dr. William Petty, a young physician and scientist, and Dr. Thomas Willis, who would later become one of the most important neurologists in history. The university had legal claim to her corpse for anatomical study. They were going to open her up and see how the human body worked. They got more than they bargained for. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now. Every week on Savage Century, we go inside the darkest, strangest, and most brutal moments in human history. You don't want to miss what's coming. When the coffin lid came off, Dr. Petty noticed something immediately. She was warm. Not the ambient warmth of a room. Her her skin. He leaned in closer, placed a hand near her mouth. There was breath, faint, almost nothing, but there. What followed was not a miracle. It was medicine. Fast, instinctive, remarkably effective medicine for the year 1650. Petty and Willis did not panic. They acted. They forced hard liquor between her lips. They rubbed her hands and arms vigorously to stimulate circulation. They held burning feathers under her nose, a common revival technique. They administered an enema. They opened a vein to bleed her, a standard intervention of the era. They wrapped her in warm blankets and placed another warm body beside her in bed to maintain heat. Within minutes, Anne Greene made a rattling noise in her throat. Within 15 minutes, she opened her eyes. She could not speak yet, she could not move well, but she was there, present, conscious. Alive in a way that had no medical explanation the men around her could immediately articulate. Word spread through Oxford like fire. By the time the sun set that evening, the story was already moving through the city. A woman hanged at Oxford Castle had come back from the dead. The physicians who were supposed to dissect her had instead saved her life. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming, and it split down familiar lines. The religious interpreted it as divine intervention. God himself had reached into that coffin and returned Anne Greene to the living because she was innocent. The execution had been unjust. Heaven had corrected the error that England's courts had not. The physicians saw something different. They saw a case study, a living proof of how much the human body could endure and how little the science of death was actually understood in 1650. What did it mean to be dead? How long could someone appear dead while still technically alive? What had the hanging, the beatings, the transport, the cold? What had all of that done to her body, and how had she survived it? Both groups were right in their own way, and both would make Anne Greene famous. Dr. William Petty wrote up the case. It was published as a pamphlet, News from the Dead, just weeks after the event, and it circulated widely across England. The account was precise, clinical, and deeply strange. It described everything: the revival procedures, Anne's condition, her gradual recovery. It became one of the earliest documented case studies of successful resuscitation in the English language. But there was still the matter of the law. Anne Greene had been sentenced to death. She had been hanged. The state had done its job, or tried to. Now she was alive again, sitting up in bed in Oxford, slowly recovering her speech and her memory. Could the crown hang her again? It was not an abstract question. There were officials who argued yes. The sentence had been death, and death had not been achieved. The law was the law. If she had survived the noose, perhaps they simply needed to try again. The public largely disagreed, and loudly. The same Puritan morality that had condemned Anne now worked in her favor. If God had returned her to life, what kind of man would dare send her back to the gallows? To execute her twice would be to war against Providence itself. No Puritan judge in England wanted to be that man. Anne Greene was granted a full pardon. The charges were dropped. She was free. She capped the coffin. Contemporary accounts record that she displayed it in her home for years afterward, a souvenir of the day the state tried to kill her and failed. Whether that was defiance, dark humor, or something else entirely, history doesn't quite say. So what actually happened? Anne Greene did not come back from the dead. She never died, not in the biological sense. What she experienced was a near-complete physiological shutdown brought on by a cascade of trauma. Judicial hanging in the 17th century was not the calculated instant death procedure it would later become. There was no long drop designed to snap the vertebrae. Victims were strangled slowly, their body weight pulling against the rope, cutting off blood flow and air, causing them to lose consciousness over minutes. It was designed to be witnessed, not to be efficient. Anne's supporters pulling on her legs likely worsened the strangulation temporarily, but also may have kept blood moving through her body at critical moments. The blows to her chest, intended to confirm or accelerate death, may have functioned as crude cardiac stimulation. The cold December air slowed her metabolism. The coffin, paradoxically, may have insulated what little warmth she had left. By the time Petty and Willis opened that lid, Anne Greene was in a state modern medicine might describe as profound unconsciousness, not death. Her heart was beating. Her brain was receiving minimal blood flow. She was, by every observable standard of 1650, a corpse. But she wasn't. The revival techniques, warmth, friction, alcohol, stimulation, were primitive but directionally correct. They restored circulation. They brought her back from the edge of a cliff she had not quite fallen off. She was lucky. Extraordinarily, improbably lucky. And so, in a strange way, was medical science, because her case forced physicians to ask harder questions about the line between life and death that they would not stop asking for centuries.
Anne Greene recovered fully. Within months, she was healthy. She returned to her community, not as a broken woman, not as a ghost story, but as someone who had, against all odds, walked back out the other side of the worst thing that could happen to a person in 1650. She married. She had 3 children. She lived for nearly another decade, dying of natural causes around 1659. History gives her no great monument, no statue in Oxford, no holiday, no official recognition. She is a footnote in medical history, remarkable enough to appear in academic journals, obscure enough that most people have never heard her name. But consider what she was, stripped of the legend. A poor servant girl, impregnated by the grandson of her employer, abandoned by the man responsible, convicted under a law that presumed her guilt, and hanged in front of a crowd while the actual perpetrator faced nothing. The system was designed to erase her. It failed.
The case of Anne Greene sits at the intersection of 3 things the 17th century was deeply uncomfortable with: the fallibility of the law, the limits of medicine, and the agency of a woman who refused, even unconsciously, to disappear. She didn't survive because of divine intervention, though many believed she did. She didn't survive because the system showed mercy, because it didn't. She survived because of biology, circumstance, and 3 physicians who chose to treat a body that everyone else had already written off. There is something worth sitting with in that. In an age when a woman's word meant almost nothing, when her guilt was assumed, her innocence irrelevant, her suffering a matter of public entertainment, Anne Greene became undeniable. Not through power, not through protest, through the sheer, stubborn insistence of her own body on continuing to exist. The coffin sat in her house for years. Make of that what you will.
That's the story of Anne Greene, hanged, declared dead, and revived on the dissection table in Oxford in 1650. One of the most documented, most extraordinary cases of survival in the history of English law and medicine. If this story made you uncomfortable, good, because the next one is even worse. We don't do surface level. We go into the room. We smell the candle wax. We watch the coffin lid come off. If that's what you're here for, subscribe, hit the bell. Leave a comment telling me which historical case you want us to cover next. Savage Century is just getting started. And history, as always, has more darkness left to give. See you in the next one.